I've discovered a really nice sock yarn for knitting machine use. It's Maxim Festive Feet Yarn. Comes in quite a few colorways, some of which have sparkles, although I have not used the sparkly kind. I prefer the other kinds. It's a bargain as sock yarns go, but there are some challenges machine knitting with it, and I've worked with it enough now that I'd like to share some tips with you. The pictures you've been seeing are all things that I've designed using this yarn, and they are all the subjects of video. If you need written patterns for socks, this is my sock knitting page on my website, and I will place a link to it in the program note. This book is the one that has the sock most like the one featured in this movie. This is called Festive Feet Yarn. It's from Maxim. It is a classic sock yarn. In recent years, there it is, 75% superwash wool and 25% polyamide or nylon or somewhat stretchy fiber are very common blends because they're really durable, really comfortable, and they wash well and last well. I love sock yarns like this one, and this one seems to me to be as high quality and durable, though I don't have any 4-year-old socks yet, so we'll see, but it seems as good as Opal and Regia name brand sock yarns. And of course, Maxim has fantastic sales. So that's the good side. It performs very well. The machines like it fine. However, it has a terrible tendency to snarl. I have been known, being basically not as good a person as I should be, to knit straight from the skein, finding the center and pulling it out. I cannot make it work on this one. Furthermore, finding the center and pulling it out so as to rewind it is no piece of cake, and I have ended up with a terrible snarl more than once. Not kidding. This is not staged. It's real. You have to be supremely patient. That's what I can get to come out. And now I really don't want to have to manually unwind all this to get to the very beginning. But after the fiasco with the first few balls, I have realized my time would be better spent unwinding this to get to the end. If I try to pull out and locate it, I have failed so many times, and that causes unwanted waste. Now, in order to get a perfect pair of socks in any self-patterning yarn, this one included, but not only this one, you must start at the same place in the pattern repeat. So the obvious place that I should start is on a maroon stripe, but there's a little bit more to it than that. This is maroon heading for maroon and cream color. This is maroon heading for a plain stripe. And this is the beginning of the pattern repeat because I started knitting the heel, and that's that. And this is that. So I'm looking for a spot like this, not a spot like this. Sometimes you have to wind off some of the yarn and set it aside for making small projects like doll clothes, which I have some videos coming out on some adorable Barbie clothes with this type of yarn, or booties. Or you can decide it's okay to have eccentric socks, and I'm just going to start where the skein starts and not worry about it. But they will not appear to be matching Fair Isle socks. The point of self-striping yarns is very often to emulate real Fair Isle because it's such fun for socks. But it's not a fantastic stitch for socks in some ways because it has less widthwise stretch. Here you're getting to see some of what happens. I believe I can release all this. But see how the yarn likes to grab itself? I guess it is some sort of static cling. I don't know why it would have it more than some similar yarns have, but it does. And knitting straight from the skein was out. Now, lots of times I wind the ball on my Nancy's winder and then knit from the center pull ball. One's a beautiful center pull ball. That didn't work either. It pulled out chunks and was very prone to making tangles and then waste of both time and yarn. Consequently, I have finally found the best way to do it, and that is rewind it onto a big ball or a cone if you have a cone winder. I don't. The Nancy's winder is my thing. And feed it from the outside. Now I'm going to start winding and keep talking. Though it looks untidy, this should wind nicely. Even having pulled out so much, I find that I need to hold my hand not only as a light tensioner, but to catch any knots that form. Also, this winder will wind really fast, but its maximum speed encourages tangling, so you don't want to actually do that. The one other thing I wanted to run by you, so you may have to do this, that's one of the things. If you are on a carpeted floor, or even sometimes a wooden floor, since this was a cake not really meant for machine knitting, I should restate that. This winder creates a cake that was designed with hand knitting in mind, not machine knitting. Sometimes you get strands of yarn under the bottom of the cake that don't want to come off smoothly, and we, of course, really need our yarns to wind smoothly. The solution is to set your ball on a shiny magazine. That's the #1 tip that I have found helpful. And the #2 tip is to wind, tensioning with one hand, as I'm doing, cranking with the other hand, and keeping that tension just light enough that I don't get any loops forming. This is annoying and tedious, and I have never wound a ball that I didn't have it happen some, but it's happening a manageable amount here, and every other way I've done it, it's unmanageable. So I think we just have to consider that a fairly laborious rewinding process is the dues we pay for using an hand knitting yarn that's such a good deal. I have not tried anti-static sprays and things like that yet. I do think it's possible they would help, but I just don't know. I don't have one on hand, and I really don't like to add foreign substances to my yarn. Now for the next while, let me try to move this where you can see it. It's likely to feed very easily. And it's not until I get to the end of the skein that I will again need to be super careful. So I would call it roughly the first third of the rewinding process is very meticulous. Then you get more than a third of easy with occasional snags. I suppose it's because there's more room down there in the center for the yarn to unravel. I can speed up a little for this part of the process, but excess speed is still going to cause a problem, and so it's a false economy. I'm sure you saw just a minute ago a loop tried to form, but it sorted itself out when it reached my fingers. That's what we hope to have happen if we're going at the optimal speed. Let's see where I am. Okay, squishing it was probably a bad plan. We want to keep as much open air inside that ball as possible. This yarn has extremely good yardage for its 3.5 ounces. I can always get a pair of socks for myself, ladies 6.5, out of it with some left over. I am experimenting right now, and we'll show you by the end of the movie whether I can get a whole men's pair or not. Here's where it's starting to get a little more, whoops. Was that a knot? It was. Oh, that's a knot. That's their factory knot. And I hope that does not mean that there's a hitch in the pattern. And you can see the naughtiness recommencing. Always keep the other yarn tail as far away as possible. I'm going to toss it to the other end of the table. See if I can keep going. No. This is just not the easiest yarn to rewind, but it is worth doing, and it makes lovely socks. So I think it's worth the effort. And rewinding is utterly essential because I have not succeeded yet by cheating and not rewinding. I'm going to leave this movie winding in real time so that you get a sense of what's truly required. You feel free to fast forward past any boring parts, but I won't do it so as to give you a clear sense. Nice ball, and you would think the center pulling would work because it's not overly tight, but I haven't been pleased with it. And you can see some of what I mean by yarn crisscrossing at the bottom, but it usually unwinds very nicely since I've wound rather loosely if I place it on a smooth, slippery magazine. Now, in order to get to the place I need to be to start sock number 2, I'm going to hand wind a ball until I get to that point in the repeat. If you have not seen this done before, this is a very, very old, time-honored technique of making a cross-wound ball. It will center pull. And I have an entire video on it. In fact, I believe it was the first video I ever made. And I can see that I am approaching a maroon stripe. And if I'm right, we'll soon come to cream color. Yeah, we are. A little bit farther, some dark green. Yes, we are. But since I started outlining this little ball off the big ball, and I was getting maroon dots alternating with cream, this is where I think I am now. And when I get to the change to maroon, that's where I want to start the next sock. So, set this aside for another project, start a sock, and we'll have a pair. On the subject of yarn requirements, the skein is 3.5 ounces. This one-man sock weighs 1.8 ounces. A little bit of that is, of course, the contrasting colored cuff. So it's going to be a near thing. Sometimes, is my expectation, we could get a pair of men's size 10.5 socks out of one skein. But on other occasions, based on how much we had to pull out to get the color repeat to match, we might not have quite enough. That matches my experience previously with this size of skein. So it's wise for most men's sizes to have 2 skeins on hand. But here's a way that you can make that economical. This size of socks, the ones that fit me, ladies 6.5, always leave extra on the skein. So you can usually count on 2 skeins to make 1 larger size pair and 1 smaller size pair. Or if you don't need any smaller adult socks, you can always buy 2 skeins to make 1 pair of men's socks and then do projects such as these out of the odds and ends.